Larry Fisher has already posted the text of the presidential proclamation in the chat. This is not an executive order and it's not a stop work order. And I'll explain what's in it in a minute. But I first want to acknowledge that this is the first president who has said the border wall is a failed solution, that it's a waste of money, it's not a serious policy approach, that the United States is now committed to a humane immigration system, and that we don't need a border wall from coast to coast. That's good. It's also good that the proclamation covers all of the wall, whatever the funding. There was some concern with some chatter before the proclamation was released that it was only going to apply to DoD funded stretches. And it is very clear in its intent that it covers all wall. It does repeal the National Emergency Declaration. That is good, and it's beneficial in some respects, no question about it. It's a little less important than some people may imagine, just as Trump's proclamation or designation of a national emergency was a little less important in some ways. It was very symbolic, and of course symbolism counts. So we now have the president saying, no, there's not a national emergency at the border. The truth is Trump didn't even use the national emergency provisions for the first 8 months after he signed it. He did use it to transfer in September of 2019, to transfer $3.6 billion from military construction funding. He might have been able to do that anyway. That's water under the dam, thank God. But excuse me, he did use that for the military construction funding, which is funding a fair portion of the walls in Arizona. For example, all the Cabeza Prieta and Barry Goldwater walls. It also comes with its own waiver of laws, but they never actually used that. They continued to rely on the Real ID Act, which allows the Secretary of Homeland Security to waive all laws for construction of border barriers. So all of that is good. I would say, however, that the proclamation, and I know a lot of us have been chatting earlier this morning about this, and a lot of my colleagues agree with this. It really exemplifies or evidences a lack of complete information about the border wall. I have actually heard off the record that they were unable to get the contracts prior to the inauguration, which makes, unfortunately, is very plausible given all the other things they couldn't get, including troop movement issues in foreign countries. So there is a lot of contracts. There's been a lot of amendments and modifications, as Dan Millis and others on this call know. Very, very hard for us to get that information. And if they were still in that same posture, that makes it very uncomfortable. They issued 17 orders yesterday. They're issuing more today. DACA just came out, folks, for anybody who's interested in that. But there is a lot of work ahead for both the administration and us and potentially Congress as the result of this proclamation. First of all, the president is telling the agencies to stop work. Somebody asked yesterday, well, he stopped Keystone, he revoked the permit. Why couldn't he just issue the stop order for the walls? Keystone is authorized by what's called a presidential permit because it's the president that has that authority under the statute. That is not the case with the border wall contracts. So what this proclamation does is tell the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense, in coordination with the Office of Management and Budget, to pause the wall as soon as possible, but no later than 7 days. Lots of conversation about why the no later than 7 days. I think in part because they need to find the contracts before they actually issue the stop work orders. Hopefully they'll get those today. There's also been concern expressed, and I think Emily alluded to this, that in some areas, Guadalupe Canyon, I've heard this from the people that live there, that if they just stopped everything and pulled out, that there are some really dangerous situations, that there's things that need to be stabilized. Hopefully, if they can get a hold of the contracts right away, figure out who needs to get what order, any further time between now and those 7 days will not be utilized for new construction, which would certainly be contrary to the spirit of this proclamation. But things like stabilization, cleanup, a little bit of responsibility as they move out. The next stage under the proclamation is a 60-day assessment of the legality of the funding, particularly the transfers, and the options that the administration has with appropriated funds. So I saw a question in the chat box about, is somebody going to go to the court and get an injunction? Well, actually, we've been in court since 2008. By now, I've lost track of the number of cases. There have been so many. I used to be able to count them very easily, but and I was involved in the second one, but many, many, many court cases. The only injunctions that we have obtained have been in relationship to what we think is illegal funding transfers from the Department of Defense and the Department of Treasury to build the wall. And all of the lower courts that have heard those cases have found that to be illegal. However, the Supreme Court stayed an injunction a number of months ago. The Supreme Court is actually scheduled to hear one of those cases dealing with what's called 284 money, the counter drug fund money, in the first week of February. It will be interesting to see. I anticipate, frankly, and I certainly hope, that the administration will file papers withdrawing their appeal. They're the ones who are appealing the lower court decisions that rule those transfers illegal. But we don't know that yet. So watch that space. There have been a number of lawsuits about the Real ID Act authorization to waive all laws. Unfortunately, all those have failed. So other things this proclamation does or doesn't do. It does not deal with rescinding the waivers of law. And that's something that I'm sure many of us will be raising with the administration soon. The administration, of course, can't repeal the authorization. That's something Congress has to do, and they should do. But the administration was never, ever, any administration was never required to use the waiver of laws. And in fact, in the Clinton administration, we declined to use the precursor to what is currently the broadest waiver of law in American history. So the administration could, the Secretary of Homeland Security could actually rescind all of the waivers that have been issued since 2008. There's 32 of them covering 84 laws. That's another little footnote complication here. I said Secretary of Homeland Security. Unfortunately, his nomination has been held up. It was held up the day before the inaugural, specifically over the border wall or border security at the southern border, with the senator from Missouri, who also was fighting against the Electoral College certification, painting a picture of horrific violence about to occur at the southern border. So that's something the administration is going to have to deal with. And I was frankly quite pleased that they went ahead and issued this proclamation, even in the face of that hold, which they are going to have to deal with to get any nominee confirmed for to be Secretary of Homeland Security. But it will be to our benefit, frankly, I think, to have a secretary in there who can rescind the waivers. Another thing that the proclamation doesn't deal with are the eminent domain cases. This is much more relevant to Texas than Arizona, but just briefly, just as the border wall construction has been going as fast as possible, as Miles and Emily and Louise indicated, the filings to take private property in Texas to build the wall where the wall is set back a mile or two have also been going with great speed. And those need to stop. President Biden, or President-elect Biden, said he would stop those. This order doesn't address, the proclamation doesn't address that. I'm hoping that will happen shortly. And in the 60-day review, it tasks the Secretary of Treasury, the Attorney General, the Director of Office of Management and Budget, Homeland Security, of course, and DOD, and other appropriate executive departments and agencies with essentially figuring out what to do while the construction is paused. And I would hope that Secretary of Interior nominee Deb Haaland is confirmed as quickly as possible. I think Interior certainly needs to be involved in this. Interior is the logical agency to take the lead in restoration. Also, the Forest Service and NOAA also have the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration have roles, but much more minor than Interior. Although here in Arizona, of course, we do have a wall in the Coronado National Forest. There is no reference to consultation with the public or communities during that 60-day period. That's another concern. The order is, I think, taken as a whole pretty clear that they are very uncomfortable with the diversion of funds from other agencies to build the wall. It is also clear that they are less clear, so to speak, about what their options are in terms of the directly appropriated funds for the wall. Most of that went to the Rio Grande Valley, but those folks have a lot to think about today. There are a number of us, including a number of lawyers, who are trying to parse through exactly what the options are and who will be talking to Hill staff or are talking to Hill staff today. For the fiscal year 2021 funding that was just passed by Congress in December to avert government shutdown, fortunately, the language is the most flexible that we have seen. It talks about it appropriates another $1.375 billion for a border barrier system. Now, that can mean a lot of things. And so far, we haven't come across anybody on the Hill who thinks it couldn't mean vehicle barriers. Trump, of course, used border wall money to take down the 18-foot wall, put up the 30-foot monster. I'm really interested in the possibility personally of seeing that money used to take down the 30-foot monster and putting up vehicle barrier in those places. Another possibility is rescission of the funds, but we had heard earlier that there were going to be contracts let yesterday morning before noon. I haven't had time to check that out and see if that actually happened. So that will make a difference on that, but at least the language is much more flexible. For the contracts that were funded in fiscal years FY 18 and 19, that's going to be where we're really going to need to do some analysis. One interesting thing about the president's proclamation is that it defines walls, essentially consistent with the way the Trump order did, defines a wall meaning a contiguous physical wall or other similar secure, contiguous, and impassable physical barrier. The first thing this brings to my mind about the issue of past funding is, as I recall, and going to be doing a lot more work on this in the next few hours, all of the earlier appropriations use the term fencing. In fact, I always used to hate that because I don't consider a 30-foot what's going up now, or even the 18-footer, as a fence. I always thought of it as a wall. So I remember being really irritated that they kept calling it fencing, but it might actually work in our favor at this point in time in terms of what can be done with that money. So there'll be a lot of conversations between attorneys for public interest groups, with congressional staff, with congressional members. Congressman Kirkpatrick in Arizona, I know, was very instrumental in getting the greater flexibility for border barrier systems. Congressman Grijalva, of course, has been opposed to the wall and the waiver of laws from the very beginning, and has every year introduced bills to repeal the waiver of laws and stop the wall. So we've got a good delegation here in Southern Arizona that hopefully can help us work through these issues. And we'll also be certainly trying to make contact with the new agency folks as they try to find their offices, get on their new computer programs and find the contracts and get to work. But that's about as far as I can go now, because we're still literally working through this.
Wonderful, thank you, Dinah. And I really appreciate you setting us straight on the presidential proclamation and what it actually means. Do you have any thoughts on the 7-day grace period, and just for us thinking about keeping eyes on the ground? And
oh, I think that's tremendously valuable. I mean, again, I don't know that it's true at every place, but I heard a pretty poignant plea recently from the family that has the ranch in Guadalupe Canyon, saying, if they just literally turn their machines around and drive out, we've got a big problem, because there's things that are really dangerous that need to be stabilized. So I also heard recently about concerns over in the western portion of Arizona that, and I had not known this before, that the Corps of Engineers was in the process of spending $4,700 to buy some habitat for the flat-tailed horned lizard. And that this particular land manager was concerned that that transaction conclude before they, while they still had the funds. And so there may be a few specific things that need to be done on a contract by contract basis, but none of that should be building new roads, pouring cement, pumping water, let alone putting up wall. So I think it's absolutely critical that we know what's going on, and then we make that known as widely as possible and as specifically as much as we can to the administration.
Great, wonderful.
And can I jump in for a second, Louise? I just wanted on that point. So what our staff is going to be doing, and what we would ask if you are along the border and you see construction, if you're seeing what looks like border construction, what's helpful right now is to document the place, the date, the time, the activity observed, and photograph it.
Absolutely.
And send that to me, send it to Miles, send it to Louise. We're going to be consolidating all of this into a record of what's being observed. So I think it's just really critical to have those pieces of information, and I'll type that into the chat.
Yeah, that's very important. And just a technical tip, all smartphones have GPSs in them. So if you take a photograph, unless you have the location services off, which most people don't, it puts the latitude, longitude in there. However, if you text it, put it in multimedia message, social media, Facebook, Twitter, it removes that GPS information. All the EXIF information is gone. So if you want to share this with any of